So, welcome to this episode of Leading Talks, and it's another very, very exciting conversation that I'm looking forward to with Dominic Wilhelm. He's Executive Director of the Global Trust Project, and he works with governments, he works with organizations, he works with leaders, so individuals as well, around the world. In fact, just before we came online, he was telling me about some work that he'll probably end up doing in Norway, in different cities, and it sounds wonderful. So I felt I had to invite him along to share his expertise, because in my initial conversation with Dominic, he highlighted something that resonated with me, and I think probably with many of you as well, and that is about a decline in trust, and that is trust in our leaders, trust in perhaps the process or the teams or the organization, and how that influences the way that we behave, but also the outcomes that we're looking for, both for ourselves and for those around us. So I'll be quiet and turn it over to Dominic, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. So Dominic, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. It's great to have you. I know you're extremely busy all the time. You're based in Cape Town, South Africa.
Yeah.
So a truly international event, and I envy you because it looks pretty warm where you are. I've got a jumper on here.
Yeah. Well, everyone thinks that South Africa or Africa is always warm, but actually today it's quite a chilly morning.
It's all relative, though, Dominic.
Let's just, what's kept me super busy this morning is the fact that I left the house with my wife's car keys in my backpack.
Ah, yes.
So the reason I was late for you is I was rushing around trying to organize a courier to get the keys back to my poor wife and 2 kids who were waiting for me. But
absolutely. It sounds half of the course. It's brilliant.
Indeed.
But you made it, and you're still smiling, so that's great.
Yeah. So where would you like me to start?
So a little bit about your background, and how you got to where you are, and what it was about trust-based leadership that really kind of drew you in.
Let me start with that. What is it about trust-based leadership that drew me in? I think my fundamental mission in life, to use that kind of language, or my purpose, I think, is to close distance. And that's close distance between self and our sense of purpose, one's individual sense of purpose, close distance between individuals and others. In the world of work, that's teams, and close distance between organizations and those who they love and serve, close distance between governments and the citizenry. So for me, it's all about closing distance. But given the fact that I'm talking about human beings, the notion of closing distance is futile in the absence of trust. Because why would I want to get closer, for example, to Ashim if I didn't trust him? Why would Ashim want to get closer to me if he didn't trust me? And at that point, it gets very interesting, because we live in a world where there's a decline in trust. Some have called it the trust deficit disorder. It's on the tips of most of our tongues, this notion of trust. It's missing. Where is it? We need it back. You can't trust anyone, so on and so forth. So it's not only prevalent in the zeitgeist, it's also fundamentally important to what I think my sense of purpose is, which is closing distance.
Okay, now I need to interrupt you here, Dominic, and I'm sorry, but I will need to do that a few times, because there's something you said that I think I'd like to dig into a little bit more before we continue, and that is what you mean by closing distance. Is it something that people would recognize as, empathy, for example, or connection, or is it an emotional closing of distance, or can you tell us more about what you mean?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things in your question there. The explicit question is, what do I literally mean? Closing distance between what? Okay. And the second, this is perhaps more implicit in your question, is the how. Okay. So what I mean by closing distance is, firstly, between people. Okay. We're living in a world where we tend to want to isolate from each other. And that brings about tremendous amounts of challenges. So in South Africa, for example, we have the highest Gini coefficient rate in the world, which means we have the most socioeconomically separated society in the world. And when you walk out the front door to the left, you'll see opulence. And on the other side of the road to the right, you will see very, very challenging circumstances. And so people are physically separate. The other kind of distance, which I'm interested in, is between oneself and one's purpose. The degree to which we are separate from, or the degree to which our sense of purpose is murky, is absent, is the degree to which we experience flourishing on a personal level. Without a sense of purpose, we cannot flourish. If I may just go a little bit deeper and just call on our friend Aristotle. He spoke about eudaimonia, right? From which we get the common good, the well-being, or flourishing. And eudaimonia says a number of things, but one of the things it says, we don't know what flourishing is until we know who and what we are. And who and what we are is fundamentally relational, okay? So to know who you are, to know your sense of purpose is embedded in us. And without that sense of purpose, we cannot flourish. So firstly, physical distance between people. Secondly, between self and purpose. Thirdly, between worldviews. In other words, say you and I have a fundamentally different worldview, and we are sitting on the other side of the aisle from each other. How is it that you and I, in a shared space, be it societally, be it organizationally, be it politically, how can you and I truly see each other? In order to do that, we need to find ways to close distance between our respective worldviews. And this reminds me the work we've done in the Philippines. Someone asked me once when I was working with national government there, they said, how do we see each other? And I said, that's perhaps one of the most important endeavors in leadership today, is to see the other's worldview and to cross the aisle, so to speak. Okay, so those are the senses, some of the senses in which I mean closing distance.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Sorry, before you continue, a couple of things. Brilliant, thank you for that. So the first thing that struck me was that you talk about the gap. One of the distances you talk about is the distance between the individual and his or her purpose. And that to me resonates, especially because I'm a firm believer that leadership begins with oneself. And if you don't know what you're leading or who you are or where you're going, then it makes it really challenging to get other people to buy into your vision and to get you to lead them. Am I understanding you correctly?
You're absolutely right. Three things come to mind when you flag that up, and I'm so pleased that you went there. The first is the hero's journey. The second are the three principles of trust or trustworthiness, which I'd love to share with you. And I forget the third, but let me go with the first two. So the hero's journey, right? The hero's journey, for those of you who haven't, for those of us who haven't heard of it, the hero's journey is a story which has been repeated throughout history, okay? And it's an archetypal story. And it appears in pretty much every hero's journey that we've heard of, be it a blockbuster, be it a novel, be it a play. And the hero's journey goes something like this. Their world first appears to be perfect, then something sets it upside down, then they go on a quest to put their world to rights and to bring equilibrium to the world, and there is a challenge that the hero goes on, the quest that they go on. On that journey, they reach rock bottom, where there's no light. They stare the abyss in the face. They believe that there's no hope, but then they find the elixir, okay? That thing in which they trust. and they abandon to, and which gives them the insight, the strength, and the wherewithal not only to overcome, or not only to survive, but to overcome and to thrive. And that is how they set their world to rights again. And this perfection, disruption, journey, overcoming, and resolution is somehow embedded in the human psyche. So to your question about what is it that, you know, each of us as leaders needs to get to grips with, I would say it's a sense of purpose as a very meaningful place to start, and that resonates with the hero's journey. And that takes me on to the 3 universal principles of trust. Yes, we work with governments, and yes, we work with organizations. We don't put up our hand and say we work specifically with leaders, but we know where the journey leads. What I mean by that is when we get into the room with either governments or organizations, and we usually work with executives or senior leadership, it's not long before the people in the room realize that trustworthiness does not start out there. It starts in here. And the in here journey begins with taking 3 questions seriously on the leadership journey, irrespective of the context. And those 3 questions revolve around or are rooted in the 3 universal principles of trustworthiness. And this is the foundation of pretty much everything that we do. These 3 principles, which I'd love to share with you and in which one can find purpose, are not our research, they're not our hack, but they're in the research. About 60 years of research, and they are what psychologists would call functional variform universals. They're functional in that these 3 principles work. They're variform in that they take different forms in different settings. They are as true for you in Poland as they are in Norway, as they are here in South Africa, as they are across the whole of Africa and the whole of the Americas, etc. And they're universal in that they work in all those territories. Wherever there's a human being with particular parts of our neurology and particular parts of our enteric nervous system present, these 3 principles work, and they are as follows. Number 1, integrity. What do you and I ground our integrity in? That's question number 1. What is our moral framework, our ethical framework, our principled framework? Okay, so that's the first question that I believe is catalytic in our journey towards purpose. What is good? The second thing is the question of benevolence. Who and what is truly valuable? Who and what is truly valuable? So when we make decisions, when we take actions, who or what are we impacting? Obviously. And who are we impacting indirectly? And the third question is one of capabilities. Given the fact that we have a certain moral orientation, which we deal with in integrity, given the fact that X and Y is truly important to me, the capabilities question kicks in like this. Given those 2 principles, what does excellence look like for me? What do my capabilities necessarily need to be in order to express my benevolence and to express my integrity? And that has personally set me off on a trajectory in life which has unlocked my personal sense of purpose. So there we are.
Okay, so Dominic, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Okay. Good. Let's suppose I'm a leader. I'm in an organization where I see opportunities for growth and development for both me and the organization. And I say, Dominic, I love what you're saying, but you know what? Every time I go and talk to my boss about something like this, they say, well, look, hang on. Are you following the rules? How much has your turnover gone up by? How much have your cost gone down by? Have you met your targets? We want hard data, and all this is fine, but do it on your own time. What would you say to someone like me in that position?
Yeah. I would in that situation specifically, where it is a member of a team answering to someone who, for example, is interested primarily in a particular type of performance, I would attempt to zoom out and get that person who's, this isn't language I use, but is used in the world of work, driving performance. I'll try and get that leader to zoom out and go, if we are only driving a particular type of performance, let's say bottom line performance, what are the implications of that? That would, for example, put us into what I would call a wrecking ball quadrant, okay? And there are 4 quadrants, of course, when you bring performance and trust into play with each other. This is the bottom right quadrant. We call it wrecking ball for the following reasons. Trust is low. In other words, the questions of integrity, benevolence, and capabilities is low. But performance, in other words, meeting the target, getting the job done, getting the KPI done, is driven and it's high. In those settings, you may well hit your target in the first quarter. You may well hit your target in the second quarter. But by the end of the 3 quarter, and I'm just making an example, of course, when you look over your shoulder and you've been running hard and the bottom line's the only thing that's mattered, what's happened in the rearview mirror? Number 1, well-being of your workforce, of your team might have been compromised. Ethical corners might have been cut. People on your team who you value may be looking elsewhere for employment. In other words, you may have hit your targets, but your risk simultaneously has gone through the roof. So the reason why we call it the wrecking ball quadrant in this example that you've given is that it's incredibly effective, but it smashes everything in its path.
Right, so it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And also, let's assume that the example you gave is from the perspective of the person who's answerable to someone more senior to them. That's a very difficult conversation to have. Very, very difficult. Systems are complex, wicked things, right? And that comes from systems thinking, of course, systems language, of course. So I just want to acknowledge that working in a broken system is incredibly difficult,
I've been there. So this is partly, from personal experience, but I'm sure I'm not alone. And I remember one employer that I had in the UK who, where you had precisely this, and before long the whole department was waiting outside the job office, the job agency, looking for another job. I mean, it's just, and everyone knew why, but very soon after that, the leader of that particular department was finally fired, but not until she destroyed, the experience and the expertise and the commitment and the motivation and the systems and the processes which had worked perfectly well before.
Yeah, indeed. So a couple of things. Let's get on the side of the person who is suffering under that kind of leadership for a moment. Well, quote unquote leadership. Mm-hmm. The first is, what's very useful in maintaining our sanity in the world of work and life is to think of the 3 circles of influence. And this isn't our concept, of course, or 3 circles of concern, it's called. In the inner circle involves parts of your work that are within your control. The next circle involves parts of your work that are within your areas of influence. And the third circle involves areas of your work that are just completely beyond your control. Expecting to be able to control, the outer 2 circles is nonsense. Okay, so what can you do beyond your areas, your immediate area of control? In the area of concern, in the area of concern, which is the second circle, you influence there, you cannot control there. So look for areas that you can influence the person that is driving that kind of performance. That type of influence might be showing them hard data, depending what type of personality type they are. It might involve showing them narrative stories. It might involve simply embodying the kind of leadership you would like to see in them, so on and so forth. bringing it closer to home in the areas of control, identify what areas you can control in that hard running environment. All of our environments are different, but your area of control might be putting down boundaries again and again and again. Often people who labor under that kind of leadership feel obliged to meet unreasonable demands. Okay? But be sure of what your contract says, be sure of what the culture says, and be sure of what your position is within, what your internal position is within that role, and hold those boundaries. We're often treated the way in which we're allowed to be treated, right? So yeah, just a couple of thoughts that come to mind.
And while you were speaking, Dominic, what struck me was that they're really, ideally, we need a two-pronged approach. So for the person in the team that's facing these challenges, it's exactly what you've described. But perhaps there's an opportunity for the leader as well. That's the kind of person that I would love to coach, and I sometimes do, and I suspect it's something that you get involved with as well. To actually shift their framework away from the hard, bottom line type criteria or KPIs to something a little bit more, trust-based.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to know what to do and how to do it unless you've asked the question who you are, involving who you are. Okay? So small things only make sense in light of the bigger picture. Our actions only make sense in the light of the way we think, and the way we think only makes sense in light of our core convictions of who we are. So the beginning is a good place to start. And our process usually goes like this. Number one, we're always looking to work with leverage points. Okay, those parts within a system that have maximum impact for minimum input. And often leadership is the place to start. Okay, so our process goes like this. Number one, it's a diagnosis. And that diagnosis involves diagnosing trustworthiness and performance. And we turn that into evidence. Number two, we go into the next leg of the journey, which involves enabling. The enabling usually takes the form of a trust masterclass. Within that trust masterclass with senior leadership, the first step is creating a shared understanding of trust, trustworthiness, and domain relevance. In other words, what does this mean to your bottom line? What does this mean to well-being? What does this mean to your organization's performance in a particular market?
Right. So you're building the bridge between trust and the hard numbers, if I can put it so crudely.
Yeah, absolutely. You are establishing the relevance to what you do. Okay. And also in that first step of the Trust Masterclass, before we go on to the second step, is we share the ability to actually measure trust and performance on the back of a piece of paper. Okay, so it makes it very tangible. And then in the second step of the Trust Masterclass, we mine down into what matters most, truly matters most. Okay, yes, the bottom line is important, but to what having established the relationship between well-being and the bottom line, how do you express that and what matters most? Okay, and only once those in the room, the leaders in the room, can see or have a shared perspective on the horizon, on the organization's sense of purpose, on where they're going, it's only at that point that you ask what needs to be true in order to bring that horizon into existence. And once that's done, in other words, this is where we're going, only then do we then move on to the third step of the Trust Masterclass, which is what does a trust-rich pathway mean? What does it look like to achieve what matters most, to get us to that horizon? And why do we want a trust-rich pathway? Well, high trust nations outperform low trust nations in excess of 1,000%. High trust organizations outperform low trust organizations around 450%. High trust teams outperform low trust teams in excess of 100%. So there's good reason we want a trust-rich pathway towards what matters most, towards that horizon. And then we go on to the third leg of the journey with the client, and that is embedding a trust-rich pathway.
Right.
Trust-rich path. Yeah.
So again, just to make absolutely clear, I understand. So when we say a trust-rich pathway, we mean a culture, a process, a system, if you like, whereby people can engage more easily, rely on the integrity of their partners, and so on. Is that right?
A trust-rich pathway involves those three principles.
Right.
A trust-rich pathway demonstrates integrity. A trust-rich pathway demonstrates benevolence, and it demonstrates capability. And there's a third element as well, which it takes into consideration, and that is one's inclination to trust. So those three principles are either amplified or moderated by this thing called inclination. In other words, Ashim might be absolutely trustworthy, but Dominic may have a low inclination to trust people that have their roots in England and are now, firmly planted in Poland. Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to trust those people.
Yeah, but that might have everything to do with my past experience and not the current reality. I might have had 3 awful experiences with 3 British Polish people, right? And because of my hang-ups and my bias and my blind spots, I impose that on Hashim. So irrespective of the fact that Hashim is absolutely trustworthy, it's my inclination because of my issues not to trust Hashim. That means that I don't experience Hashim as trustworthy, and therefore we don't build the relationship that we could.
And so Hashim doesn't trust you back, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So if I'm treating you in a non-trustworthy way, you'll pick it up. Tit for tat theory, game theory tells us that very, very clearly. If I'm disinclined to trust you out of the gates, it's unlikely statistically that you're going to trust me back. Okay. And leaders, trust-rich leaders or trust-based leaders can flip that script. They can always choose to exercise what we call non-fatal. You're gonna have to edit this. I'm just going to get the wording right. Non-fatal demonstrations of trustworthiness. Okay, so trust-based leaders can flip the script. They can always choose to exercise non-fatal expressions of trust. In other words, we know that trust is the willingness to be vulnerable based on expected behaviors. Okay, what that means is I am willing to make myself vulnerable to Hashim. In other words, to take emotional and physical risks with Hashim based on the way I expect he is going to treat me. Okay, so flipping the script would entail this. Let's say I know, because I'm a trust-based leader, and this is of course just an example, I know that Hashim, or it's unclear to me whether or not Hashim is trustworthy. How would I exercise a non-fatal expression of trustworthiness? I would do the following. I would ask Hashim for advice. So I'm the risk I'm taking there, not knowing how Hashim is going to treat me, is non-fatal, because if he says, I don't know, you're on your own, I'm not going to help you with anything, that's not fatal to me. Okay, so I say, Hashim, please, I'm making myself vulnerable here. This would be implicit, right? I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. May I have your help? That's me extending trust to you, extending vulnerability to you. And that gives you a chance to reciprocate or not. If you don't reciprocate, I'm okay, I'll survive that. A fatal exercise of trust would be, Hashim, I have messed up. I have unknowingly broken a European law by making this transaction as opposed to that transaction, and that puts my organization's reputation at risk. What do I do? If Hashim was not trustworthy, he could then of course go to the press, go to the news, go to the ombudsman, as opposed to helping me to rectify something that I wanted to rectify. That could be fatal to me. So sure. Reversing back, trust-based leaders can flip the script, always choose to exercise trust, always be the first to trust, always choose to trust, but in a non-fatal way. For what purpose? To build trust and to influence the person that's across the table from them.
Right. Okay. I think I got that. Now, that's fine. until there's some major turbulence in the environment. Now, clearly, trust is a great foundation upon which to deal with such turbulence, because you're working more closely together, a trust-rich relationship, a trust-rich environment. But doesn't that also strain those trust-based bonds when leaders have to take difficult decisions, which may be perhaps unexpected for their followers?
Let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. Sometimes the context in which you're in may test those core fundamental principles, may test, for example, your integrity, benevolence, and capabilities. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. If you're in a particularly turbulent environment, something has happened, right? There's a change in the law or whatever it is, and your organization has to make some quick decisions. You may need to do stuff that people don't like, that you don't like, but it needs to be done. Does that tension in the relationships that leaders and their teams have, how do leaders deal with that?
Okay, well, let's say that, for example, involves compromising your trustworthiness, right? You will feel the consequences. It's just a matter of time. Okay, the data, the research is very clear. It's not unworthy trust. It's not untrusted organizations that perform better. It's trusted organizations that perform better. It's not untrusted teams or untrusted governments that perform better, irrespective of market conditions. It's trustworthy organizations that perform better, and that includes the myriad of difficult decisions that need to be made. So I would ask the question, irrespective of how difficult things are, why would you want to act in an untrustworthy way? Even though there might be a short-term challenge that arises out of your trustworthiness. Out of your trustworthiness as a result of trustworthiness.
Yeah. So I was thinking something like, I'm a member of a team. I trust my leader implicitly and the rest of the members of the team. And something happens, and suddenly I have to. The leader has to cut numbers, right? He's got to fire some people, whatever. Suddenly, my belief in my leader's integrity is challenged, is it not?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So let's take an example of cutting a team.
Yeah.
Let's paint two scenarios. Scenario one is that leader who is cutting a team is trustworthy. In other words, the team, the ecosystem, let's say his peers, let's call it peers. In world one, that leader is trusted. In other words, her peers believe they have integrity, benevolence, and capabilities. And the peers have an inclination to trust that leader. In that world, when the leader cuts someone from a team, the peers, market, the stakeholders will believe, rightly so, that there was no other option and that leader took everyone's best interests to heart. Okay? They would know, without asking any questions, that trusted leader would have done their very best to make sure it was a fair severance, would have looked at absolutely looked at the situation through absolutely every angle. And also in a mature ecosystem, in other words, the ecosystem that includes all those peers, we realize that sometimes people do need to be let go. Not because they're hated, not because they're any lesser, but because systems are imperfect and the world is imperfect. And sometimes it just happens. The second scenario, where that leader is not trusted, in other words, they don't have integrity, don't have benevolence, don't have capabilities, the perspective might be flip. They only had the bottom line in mind. They probably cut every corner to get rid of that person, and they're on a pathway to shrinking the workforce as much as they possibly can, merely for the bottom line. And that won't breed a culture of resilience at all.
Right.
So we experience the same action, but experienced in totally different ways.
Absolutely. Understood. Now, one of the things that I'm, I'd love to run training on or do coaching on is the area of communication, because we all think we're brilliant and actually most of us are rubbish. How much of a role does communication and engagement play in developing a trust-rich environment?
Yeah, I think it's very important. But when we talk about communication with our clients, we talk about it as an outcome, and there's often confusion in the marketplace. Clients often or sometimes have the expectation that communication creates trust. Okay, it may well, provided that communication is what we would call non-fictional communication. In other words, it's not spin, it's not weaving a false narrative. It actually relates to actual behaviors and actions and phenomena in the real world. So communication, which appears to be trustworthy, can cause as much damage as it can cause positive outcomes. What I mean by that is, you and I know that for eons, playwrights, advertisers, politicians, leaders have been able to influence the masses, okay, with purportedly trustworthy and inspiring stories, just to be found in reality to be fictions, right? So we lead people astray, we get people to buy products that they don't need, we get them to vote in particular ways that is actually a dead end, so on and so forth. So what that does is add to the vicious cycle of untrustworthy communication, where that trustworthiness was actually a fiction, okay? The positive outcome would be trustworthy communication that has a correlation to the real world, okay? Where things that are promised are delivered on. Challenges that are purported are in fact challenges, so on and so forth. So communication, communication which is perceived to be trustworthy can be damaging, and it can also lead to positive outcomes depending on whether or not it correlates to the real world. So that's why we always start with the actual phenomena, the actual behaviors, and then the communication follows.
Understood. Okay. So now that, of course, begs the question, because, we did say that you work with governments. When these governments call you in, what are they saying to you? Are they saying, look, our people don't trust us. What do we do about it? Or, is there some kind of internal conversation going on that says, how do we get our people to trust us? How does that normally work, typically?
The type of leaders in a government setting that approach us, it's usually very positive. What I mean by that is, it's usually, we have an internal issue with trust. Help us in order to serve better. I've never been in a situation where a government team, be it political or administrative, has approached us and said, you know what, the challenge is with the public, or the challenge is with the voter. Help us to influence them. It's always begun with, we have an internal challenge, help us in order to better serve. So
yeah, but what I mean is, how, are they saying, well, we say all these things and they are genuine, they're, this is what we intend to do, but our people don't believe us?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that's, they have the realization that they are in fact trustworthy, but they're not trusted. I'll say that again, they are trustworthy, but not trusted. And what they need to do is understand why they are not trusted. And that's where inclination comes in. Why is it that their constituents don't trust them, irrespective of what they're providing? And again, I'll say this, it has very little to do with the current reality and much more to do with perceptions of the past, perceptions that have been created by the past. And that's more often than not where a lot of work needs to happen. It's with the trustor as opposed to the trustee. It's the trustor's inclination to trust, which isn't rooted in the present, but it's rooted in the past. Right. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, politicians have a pretty steep hill to climb, don't they? Because, people generally don't trust them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and they're not trusted because there's some politicians in this world that are just, here's the cliche term, spin doctors, right? weaving magnificently inspiring stories that are perceived to be eminently trustworthy. But then in practice, when they become incumbents, they fail to deliver. And that is added to a horrendous cycle, a vicious cycle of distrust. Could I just step back for a moment?
Say again, sorry.
Could I just step back for a moment?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So just to, maybe it's a framework that might be useful, and you feel free to cut this out. The framework that I usually find useful goes something like this, okay? Ever since we shuffled off the African continent, right, about 70,000 years ago, the first successful migration, there are parts of our brain and enteric nervous system that have looked for one thing. Ever since we took our first breath, ever since we took our first high five, stole our first kiss, went to our first business relationship, implicitly or explicitly, human beings have been looking for this one thing. And if we find it, it changes everything. And that one thing is trust. Right now, you and I are looking for it in each other. And that trust is the willingness to be vulnerable based on expected behaviors. Okay? If we can find these expected behaviors in each other, we will trust each other. And then as an outcome, the psychological state of trust emerges. And when that happens, extraordinary things happen in civil society, the world of work, and interpersonally. Okay? It's literally off the scale. So it begs the question, what are those expected behaviors that others are looking for in everyone, let alone leaders? You and I are looking for in each other the following: integrity, do we do what is good? Benevolence, do we do what is considerate? And capability, okay, do we do it to the best of our ability? In other words, the challenge and the opportunity for trust-based leaders in the world today is to do what is good, do what is considered, and do it to the best of your ability. And that's where the journey starts in the world of work and with governments, is to answer
in your experience, Dominic. I mean, that's brilliant. Actually, it's really encapsulating the key issues. But in your experience, is there one of those three that leaders have a blind spot about, or do you find it kind of spreads across all of them?
All of those three, when you have a reasonable conversation about them, are common sense. Where the challenge comes in is turning those principles which you can agree on in a retreat, in a meeting, in a self-reflection, is converting them into the real world of work. That's the real challenge. That's why we focus on operationalizing trustworthiness in organizations and governments. So what does that practical trust-based pathway look like in your real world? So that is the real challenge, okay? Because it doesn't matter how great the retreat is, the strategy session is, the magnificently crafted strategic document. The moment you put a full stop on it, something peculiar happens. And that peculiar thing is called reality, okay? You hit the office, you hit the constituency, 8 o'clock Monday morning, and you're hit by 1,000 different things. And most of it evaporates. All of those magnificent things evaporate. So how do you sustain? So we talk about a trust-rich pathway, which involves 3 lanes. And I'm going to link this to a conversation I had with the chief scientist at Gallup. A trust-rich pathway has 3 lanes. Number 1, the first lane is cues. What cue, in other words, signal or behavior, do you embody as a leader? Okay, in the way you talk, in the way you pitch up, in the way you respond to others, in the respect with which you treat the people you work with, in the way that you are embodying the values that you've spoken about for so long. So it's a cue. It costs nothing. It's immediate, and there's no excuse. Lane number 2 in a trust-rich pathway to operationalize trustworthiness. Lane number 2 involves cadences. A cadence is a ritual or a habit that you put in place to reaffirm trustworthiness as you define it or as you express it. It might be regular meetings, it might be regular research, it might be a regular affirmation of your true north, whatever it means for your organization. The third lane in operationalizing a trust-rich pathway is controls. What are the black and white governance and procedures, policies and procedures, the black and white KPIs that express your trustworthiness in the organization? Again, no excuse not to know it, okay? And they govern what you do. So trust-rich pathway is tremendously useful, involving cues, cadences, and controls to crossing the divide between what you profess and what you do in the world of work. That's the real challenge that we're looking to solve for when we work with leaders. And let me just be open about this. Not only are the underlying principles universally true and part of the human condition, in other words, there's no black box here. The second thing is, this isn't rocket science. Okay, there's no special algorithm, there's no special formula.
Yeah, I mean, again, music to my ears, because this is something I'm passionate about. I think I touched on it earlier. It's all about changing one's behavior, the way one thinks, and that's a process. And it's very difficult to do it on your own. You can wake up on a Monday morning and say, right, from today I'm going to start, let's use a trite example, go running every morning. And after a couple of weeks, you think, oh, well, I'll do it twice the distance tomorrow, and so on. It's very difficult to make those fundamental changes alone, even though it is taking you where you want to be. And so having those three elements in place is something I feel strongly about as well. So with my coaching clients, with my training, I try and extend them over a long period of time until we actually see behavioral change with tangible results.
Yeah.
That we're expecting. I think you just told me that's exactly how you operate as well, which is great. Can you share a particular story, a specific story? Obviously, you don't need to name anyone, but how that actually worked in reality?
Yeah, let me just think for a moment. So let me, a European government that we work with in social services in particular, and have just entered into a very challenging period, budget-wise, and also expectations-wise. So the budget's gone this way and the expectations have gone that way in terms of what they deliver to their community. And taking seriously the notion of what matters most to them, they were then able to co-create a trust-rich pathway of cues, cadences, and controls, and instill that in the organization. But their particular department has 14,000 employees. So how do you transition from 7 people in the room to positively influencing 14,000 people? Even though the trust-rich pathway is the way, putting that up on the wall, so to speak, won't amount to much. What they found particularly effective was being clear on what matters most. And the way in which we approach that in our trust masterclasses is we use strategic narrative. In other words, it involves in a structural way actually telling the story in an inspirational way of what you're doing in the world. Okay, it has a beginning, middle, and end. It has outcomes, so on and so forth. As you well know, if you can tell a story well, you inevitably shape behaviors. So it has a way of replicating at scale narratives and strategic narratives. And this was apt for social services, which includes primary healthcare. They were able to effectively infect their system with a particularly compelling narrative. And the challenge, which is the higher grade challenge that we welcome leaders to engage with, right, when they're telling their story, is as follows. It's to get a bunch of kids, and I'm being serious now, a bunch of kids into a room, be it a school class or as long as they're 10 years old, bring their parents in with them, okay? And you tell, as an executive team, you tell the story of what you're doing in the world. If you can, number one, hold their attention, and number two, if they understand what you have said, only then have you got a trust-rich and compelling narrative, and you understand what you're doing. And of course, I'm thinking of Einstein, right? He said, unless you can tell your story unless you can explain it to a 10-year-old, it's unlikely you know what you're doing. And of course, I'm thinking of Yuval Noah Harari, who's recently saying exactly the same thing. And he also adds this: those who tell the story rule the world. So narrative is incredibly powerful. And unless you can tell it to a young mind and a young heart, and they understand what you're doing, it's unlikely you know what you are doing.
And they trust the storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. A great point. So that's an example which emphasizes the power of a strategic narrative to infect the system and then bring that trust-rich pathway to life.
Right. Sounds brilliant. So if I'm a leader here, sitting here, I'm listening to Dominic Wilhelm talking and thinking, yeah, that makes sense. This is something that I think our organization, our teams would benefit from. What are the 3 pieces or 2 pieces or whatever number you choose of practical things that they can do today to get the ball rolling, apart from, of course, giving you a call, and we'll be giving you your email address and contact details later. But what would you advise them to do?
As a leader, simply ask yourself 3 questions. How am I exercising integrity as a leader in everything I do? How am I exercising benevolence in everything I do? And how am I doing this excellently? So trust-based leadership involves doing what is good, doing what is benevolent, and doing it to the best of your ability.
Would you advise the leader to ask others around him or her those questions? Because, of course, our perceptions of ourselves are different to others' perceptions of us.
I absolutely would. And first, to ask them of yourselves. Secondly, to ask them of those around you. And you work out your gross trust score, right? Your gross trust score for you is whatever scale you're going to use, out of 10, out of 5. You add the 3 scores up for integrity, benevolence, and capabilities, divided by 3, and that's your gross trust score, right? And then for your colleagues, your peers, your friends, your family, ask them exactly the same questions, ask them to score it, and see how the 2 gross trust scores differ from each other, and then think critically of how you can close the gap between who you are and the perceptions that others have of you.
It's interesting. I've done that exercise a few times, actually, and it is quite surprising, isn't it? Because we assume everyone thinks of us in the same way as we think of ourselves, until we ask them, and sometimes it's a bit of an eye opener.
Yeah, indeed. Some of it we can't be blamed for, no matter how hard we think about these things, no matter how reflective we are, we have built-in biases which we just can't see. Right? There's a saying, if you want to know what water is, don't ask a fish.
Right.
And the moral of the story is that a fish is so incredibly immersed in its own watery existence, it cannot possibly see another world, cannot possibly see another existence. So it's the same with you and I. We're so immersed in our own worldview and our own perceptions. It's difficult, to look through the waterline onto land, into the air, to see different perspectives and to look from the outside back in.
Yeah, we're confined by our own parameters from our life experience.
Yeah.
And also what we would like to see ourselves as being. I think we have that as well, don't we? We see ourselves as someone who is naturally benevolent or naturally demonstrates integrity, until someone tells us, well, hang on, you're not. And
also, they may or may not be right.
Right.
You may in fact be, a 7 out of 10 when it comes to benevolence, right? But because of someone else's inclination to trust people like you, they may not actually see that because of their bias. So It's a journey, it can take time. It's not only about the trustee, it's also about the trustor.
Right.
So as trustors, knowing what the three fundamental principles are, as well as your own inclination to trust, is as valuable as being a trustee, asking exactly the same questions, and being aware of, their own inclination to trust themselves, and whether or not they do in reality exhibit those, behaviors that embody those three principles.
Right. Absolutely fascinating, and a very, very complex picture it turns out to be. And it makes perfect sense, I think, to go through the process that you have created in your organization.
There's something you said, where to start, basically. And I said, do what is good, do what is benevolent, do what is capable. There's another place one might want to start, and it's going to need just some visualization. Can I do it? Can I share it with you very quickly?
No, please do.
Great. Let's just imagine 4 quadrants. On the vertical axis is low trust to high trust. On the horizontal axis is low performance to high performance. Okay. And let's start with the top right quadrant, which is high trust, high performance. That's what we call thriving. Okay. And that's where you want to be. That's where resilience is high. The future's de-risked. Innovation is high. You're able to sustain. You're a lot more shock resistant, so on and so forth. That's where you thrive. That's where high trust nations outperform low trust nations, high trust organizations outperform low trust organizations, so on and so forth. Now, what happens when, and I mentioned this early in the conversation, what happens if your performance remains high, but your trust is low? That takes you to the bottom right quadrant. And we call that the wrecking ball quadrant, where you're incredibly effective at doing things, but you smash everything in your path. So you could perform for this quarter, perhaps the next, but well-being goes through the floor, retention goes through the floor, attracting best talent goes through the floor, so on and so forth. We call that wrecking ball. Now let's go to top left in the quadrant, which is high trust, low performance. We call that the lemming quadrant. That's where everyone trusts each other, but they don't know that they're running towards the cliff face. Okay, high trust, low performance. Bottom left of this quadrant is low trust, low performance, and that we call the black hole. Nothing gets out alive. In that quadrant, no matter how many or how much money or how many tools you throw into the mix in that quadrant, unless you are willing to address trustworthiness, unless you are willing to address a full spectrum of performance indicators, it is hugely unlikely that you'll get out of the black hole without addressing the fundamentals of the situation. So that's another useful way to start. Very easy to draw that up. Quadrant, vertical axis, trustworthiness, horizontal performance, and plot where you are.
And the performance criteria that you would use would, I suppose, depend upon the KPIs that you have?
Yes, so we start with 4 principles, and the 4 principles are as follows. The first variable is what we call perspective. In your world, do you understand your market? Do you understand your values? Do you understand where you're going? So on and so forth. So it's your perspective. The second variable is, given your perspective, do you have the correct plan in place? Do you have a plan that is distinctly suited to another context or to your context? The third variable is ability. Do you have the abilities to execute your plan, your effective plan, in your context? Okay. And the fourth variable when it comes to performance is, do you have that compelling narrative that encapsulates your perspective, effective plan, and abilities? Because if you don't have that compelling story, it's not going to scale in any meaningful fashion. It's great if you've got this amazing plan in your boardroom or amongst your peers, but what about the 10,000 other employees around the world? How does it get to them? I can guarantee you it's not going to be a LinkedIn post. It's not going to be a a 79-page strategy document. There's going to need to be something that enables that strategy to self-replicate at scale, to bring your ecosystem alive. So those are the 4 variables within performance that we start with, and it can be complemented in any number of ways depending on what your specific setting is.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, it makes perfect sense. You might have the most cohesive plan or strategy in place, but unless you connect with people who actually make it happen and connect with them on an emotional level and get their buy-in, without, it's not going to work. And for that, you need the narrative that you mentioned, I think. So, how would somebody want to, if someone wants to find out more about how you work, Dominic, and the kinds of organizations and individuals you speak with, how would they do that?
So you can simply Google the Global Trust Project, or you can Google my name, Dominic Wilhelm, and the Global Trust Project. You can also go to LinkedIn and simply look up my name. I'm there. You can go to our website, theglobaltrustproject.one, that's .1. We have all the other domains, but I really enjoy ONE. Or you're welcome to email me on path, PATH, at theglobaltrustproject.one.
Path at globaltrustproject.one, yes?
It's the Global Trust Project, yeah, .one.
The global, yes, T. Don't forget the T at the beginning. Dominic, that was absolutely fascinating and extremely valuable to leaders who are kind of banging their heads against brick walls at the moment and aren't quite sure why there's no movement in their leadership growth. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And it was great. It was great that you managed to take the time, and I'm delighted that you managed to get your wife's car keys sorted out.
Well, when I log off here, I'm going to make sure she's got them.
All right. Well, I hope she has. But listen, take care and have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care, mate. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.